earlier, sitting here itself a couple of years back.
Yeah, it feels like deja vu, just before the pandemic, I think in January 2020, I was here with Varun Chandra and we were talking about my then new novel, Sarojini's Mother. And there were some lovely refreshments afterwards, so stay tuned.
And not only that, he was back again for releasing Calcutta.
That was earlier.
That was earlier. And that was in the lawns of Kolkata. I used the word Calcutta Club. But before we begin, right, I need to narrate this incident. This is what happened yesterday evening. I was downstairs at the reception, and a very senior member of the club walks past me and sees that poster up on the wall. And then he peers at it and he says, "Isn't he the man who has a Japanese wife?" So I couldn't readily deny that. I mean, I didn't say yes or no. I said, "Yeah, he does look familiar." I felt slightly embarrassed with that. But while walking away, he was muttering to himself, "Hemingway will be blessed, Hemingway will be blessed." I was wondering why he said that. And perhaps you might just start with that little trigger as to why should Hemingway be blessed, being blessed in his grave.
Right. First of all, thank you. Thank you for having me here. Hemingway had written obviously this famous book called A Moveable Feast. And there's a wonderful paragraph in that book which says, if you have been lucky enough to have lived in Paris as a young man, then wherever you go for the rest of your life, it stays with you. For Paris is a movable feast. And obviously what he meant was, there are some precious memories that we have. Places of people, of events, and a whole host of things. And wherever we might go later in life, whichever city we might end up living, they stay with us. They're movable, they move with us. And in many ways, this book, when we thought about a title, we couldn't think of a better title but to borrow from Hemingway. And Hemingway features in this book, as you will see. We call it Moveable Feasts. Because these feasts are not simply feasts for the tongue, but they're feasts for our senses. These are feasts for our mind. And all that we have accumulated over our years going around the world, living in different parts of the world, countries, traveling, experiencing the world, have become movable feasts for us. Wherever we go, they go with us.
How beautifully said. And with Kunal being an eternal romantic, everything around him is built around romance, right? So it's a 40-year journey which he puts across in these 4 years of, I think you conceptualized the Moveable Feast in 4 years' time. Was it 4 years?
It was 4 years, wasn't it?
It was 4 years.
It's around 4 years.
It actually started in Oxford on a summer evening, on a beautiful summer evening, as we were drinking wine at home. Now, all good things start with wine, don't they? And we were thinking back with respect to all our travels and things like that, and we said, look, what's going to happen when we are dead and gone? All our memories, the things that we have seen and experienced and desired and felt, they'll be gone. Only our daughter, our only child, will have some memory of it, some understanding of it, but they'll be lost to the world, lost to time.
So we are a very bookish family. So I suggested to him that we could write a book about our experience and share with other people.
So the idea of the book was born there.
Moni actually first time আপনারা বার করে টেলিগ্রাফে একটা ছোট্ট আর্টিকেল করেছিলেন, right? On prawns. Was it on prawns?
That was the first chapter, Sepia Prawns.
Sepia Prawns. That was the first. I remember that really. So that gave you all confidence to get across and.
No, actually, we thought we would write. We thought we would put it together. But here is the difficulty, Shan. How do you stitch it all together? We are excited by history. We're excited by travel. We're excited by literature, books, by films, by visual arts, by paintings and sculpture and architecture. We're interested in cuisine. We both cook. Okay? So we're interested in experimenting with food and obviously the travels to far-flung parts of the world. How do you stitch it all together? So that it doesn't appear to be a rambling narrative. And we certainly didn't want to write a memoir. Okay? So we said, let's use food as a leitmotif. Let's use cuisine as an organizing principle. Let us think about our feasts, great feasts that we remember. Okay? Again, feast for the tongue, feast for the senses, feast for the mind. And let's organize our journeys around them. That was sort of the basis. And we did, a friend of ours who then worked for the Telegraph said, oh, why don't you publish one of these? I said, well, we can give you our first chapter and let's see what your readers feel like. And the readers were, we were flooded with requests. They said, write more. And that's what an author would like to hear anyway. So we embarked on this book.
So those few of you who haven't seen the book outside, it's right out there. It's called Moveable Feasts. It's 500 pages of incredible captions. There's a lot of effort put behind the conversion of the images, right? There are a lot of analog and digital images which have come across here. So I think there are more than 1,000 pictures in here.
Yeah.
So how do you manage to get someone to get this going for you? Because this is just not within, you did that part of knowing what to get across where, but then getting it done was quite an effort by itself.
It took us 4 years, and we didn't work continuously on it. Susmita is a ceramic artist, she was at shows, she was doing stuff. I write novels, and I've had about 3 or 4 novels in the interim, but it sort of was woven into our work. And every so often, we would sit down and we say, okay, shall we do the next chapter? Shall we do the next feast? And yes, photography. So I had close to 10,000 photographs, mostly slides. There was a time when I would do a lot of photography. Susmita and I would travel around the world, laden with camera gear, okay, analog camera time, all kinds of lenses and so forth. So one big challenge, I wouldn't call it a challenge, one big excitement for us was when we designed these chapters and we wrote about these chapters, we said, which photograph should we select? And as usual, we had too many. Okay, and when the first dummy of the book was created, we went about and we started slashing and said, no, not this one, no, this one. In publishing, we've got a term which says, killing your darlings. If you write and you've written a wonderful line, but your editor says, oh, you've overwritten, could you cut it down, please? It feels like killing your darlings. So we killed quite a lot of darlings to get to this book.
So it must be quite challenging to try to get a publisher who could try to understand the totality of this venture. It wasn't just pictures or narratives or travel or the recipes.
I'll tell you this, Sayan. Conventional publishers have a very hard time understanding a book like this. Readers don't. Okay. So, conventional publisher would say, is it a cookbook? And we would say, yes, and more. They would say, is it a travel book? Yes, and more. Is it a history book? Yes. Is it an album of photographs? Yes. Is it about literature? Is it about, so it goes on and on and on. It is about life. It is about our portfolio of passions. But most conventional publishers try to pigeonhole. Okay. We were, I was having a conversation one time with Gautam of Starmark, and he said, please do a book with us. I said, but are you interested in a picture book? He said, yes. And then I told him in a nutshell, I think Susmita and I were both there, and we stood in Starbucks with a cup of coffee in our hands, and I said, oh, how about this? And he said, yes, I'll do it. Okay. So unconventional books call for unconventional partners, and that's what we had in Starbucks.
But you relied on your instincts for a lot of things, like you did all your life, right? You deeply listen to yourself intuitively. I mean, whether it's been from your earlier years when you changed career, nobody knows much that you're a mechanical engineer by profession, then doing management, and then traveling all across. Wherever your instincts took you, you just listen to yourself deeply, instinctively.
So look, Susmita and I are adventurous people. We travel, we experience things, we try to learn stuff that we've never done before. And so, yes, of course, it calls for us to sort of determine what we like. One thing which we decided, didn't we, when we did this book is everything that we put in this book from a written word to a photograph, they have to be authentic. To the recipes, this is what we feel, this is what we have experienced. Okay? We want it to be real. We didn't want conventional food photography. I dislike conventional food photography. Why is that? Because the professional camera person would set up a dish, they would light so that every part of the image is well lit, they're shiny, etc. But when you serve food on your dinner table, all of you, the light comes into the window, casts a shadow on the table, there's a flare somewhere else, you can see a photograph on the wall. That's real. That's what we wanted to do in terms of our images, in terms of the words, the chatty nature of the prose, as you will see. It's not a conceptual book. It's not a theoretical book. It's not some deep secret about cuisine. It is about what we have done, what we have experienced, what we have loved, and what we wanted to share with you.
But you're only confusing me, Kunal, because if I try to understand who are you? Who are you, Kunal? Are you an author? Are you an academic? Are you a photographer? Are you a cookbook specialist who's writing recipes? Are you a traveler? Are you a storyteller? Are you, you're doing everything in one, and it's like a big broth you've done, and you put everything in with your take on the ingredients, without telling yourself, I want to find an outcome, a cohesive end to the process. You're enjoying every bit of this whole phase, specifically in a closed environment which is normally dominated by the so-called lady of the house. Now I'm going to come to Susmita where she's
No, that's not true, that's not true. Let's tell you some stories. Okay, Susmita, we've written this in this book. So Susmita went to school in Vishabharati. Grew up in eating canteen food, right?
Yeah.
I was a middle-class Bengali boy who had never stepped into his mother's kitchen. I could hardly boil water for tea. And then I go to study in America on a scholarship, very small scholarship, right? So I couldn't afford to go out and eat in restaurants every day, so I had to cook. But when Susmita and I got married, she didn't know how to cook at all.
I had no idea how to even boil eggs.
We will come to that story later, of course.
And so I taught her how to cook. It's a role reversal here.
Okay, yeah. So I'll take that back, and I keep saying that many fires burnt in the kitchen, right? It started with an ember, then it went to a flame, perhaps then it was a fire. I'm not going to ask the quantum. Was it everything a very pleasant experience in the kitchen, or at times you all burnt yourself, burnt each other, metaphorically?
We didn't argue from time, no?
Yeah.
We argue a lot.
Were you always doing your meat the correct way, or at times you had to depend on her instincts too?
So I force my instincts at times because Kunal has his own ways, and that was sometimes I had to stop him because he will keep on doing things. He's a perfectionist, so I had to tell him, like, in cooking, if you start doing this, then it might burn the.
See, Susmita is strategic in the kitchen. She has a clearer mind than me. She knows where she's going to. She knows her destination. Okay? Whereas I'm impulsive. So, to take an example, we have a feast which we call Keema Rumistani. Why Keema Rumistani? Because we've traveled in northwest of India, so India, Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, and so forth. And we have bestowed this land to the great Sufi poet Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi. So we call it Rumistan. And so we have a feast where our main dish is a keema dish. We call it Keema Rumistani. Okay? And I love to go Keema Rumistani, except that I don't want to stop. And so, no, I want to burn the meat, you see, because if you burn the meat, it gives off a certain kind of aroma.
Like kosha.
And Susmita always says, now it's done now, not stop. Okay? You want to make this bitter, it's going to taste awful. And so, we have arguments. I think that guava pickle is too sweet.
No, you think it's too sweet. You told me that it's perfect.
Yeah, sometimes you have to build bridges with your enemy.
But going back to your interesting story of Kima Romanstar, I think that was also something to do with the period in which you were doing your books. I think miniaturist was out at that point of time.
Yeah. This was sometimes food can lead you into trouble. So I was writing this novel called The Miniaturist, which is set in the 16th century, the reign of Akbar, the story of an artist, a young artist. And my whole approach in writing is, when I write a character, I want to become that character. So in theatre, it's called method acting. The great Soviet theatre director Stanislavski had created this, written about this method. But how do you lead the life of a Mughal?
Living the role as it is.
Yeah, how do you live the role of a Mughal? I mean, with a harem and hunting parties and wars, and how do you do it? So we thought to live like a Mughal, eat like a Mughal.
So we started cooking and spreading our food
on the carpet, listening to qawwalis, and a lot of biryani, a lot of kebab.
It does have its side effects also.
So we both put on weight. So it has its risks. Yeah.
There's a very interesting comment is mentioned there, which I really need you to clarify. The differences between different kinds of kebabs. I really didn't know this. I mean, you said there's the Persian kebab, that's with a B-A-B, seemed like the blood brother of Turkey's kebab, that's with a P. And Indian Pakistan has the kebab, which is B-A-B, and Uzbeks and Tajiks call it kawood. Yeah. So is it the same kebab which is in different terms, or is it done differently?
It is the transition of a core cuisine across regions. You see, our biryani actually came from Persia, from Pulao. But the biryani that we taste is very different. Now, why is that? Because when a cuisine travels historically over time, it keeps acquiring the ingredients, the cultural expectations of the cooks and also the people who eat that food. So it undergoes mutation and takes different forms. But if you look closely, you will see that the genesis is the one and the same. So that's why we said that.
But I'm going to, before I get back into the ecstasy of cooking, there are certain instances where cooking can be a disaster, right? I know it can be quite a messy thing. So, Susmita, would you like to tell us a little bit of small anecdote which you had initial years? I think it was the Kunal Basu story.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Go on, tell them.
Yeah.
It was Kunal's mom she was a very good chef. Chobi Basu. And at the same time she was a writer and a very good storyteller. So her cooking, most of the time when we invited guests, and she used to cook the Bengali dishes, Bangladeshi dishes and specialty. So one day we invited our very close friends, Sam and Francesca, and for the evening, and her mom said that I'm going to cook the coconut prawns. So I said, okay, that's fine.
East Bengal style kora hobe ki
her way,
Okay.
adding lemon leaves and things like that. So I was very happy that I don't have any responsibility on this part. But I was doing the side dishes and things. So at that time, while she was doing marinating the prawns and things, she started telling us the story of how she met Gandhi and how she met
Rabindranath.
And so all kind of stories she was telling us. And the slow afternoon, we prepared the meal and we were very happy with it.
She was also telling us the story of Kanun Bala, remember? My favorite was Kanun Bala, and how she would dress up like Kanun Bala and get her photographs.
Right, double petticoat.
Double petticoat. We have seen the pictures, and she was singing the songs, and she was in a very good mood, and she was doing all this. So we were happy. It came out right, looked right. So we waited for the evening with wine and everything. When we were sitting down for the meal, our guest, and we were very eagerly waiting, this
stage,
They were
with
excited.
all the effort put in.
And Francesca, she's very upfront about everything. So she said, I said, how was it? And she tasted it and her face was totally pale. And she said, God awful, I have never tasted this kind of prawns ever. And I was totally, we were stunned.
We were gobsmacked.
Gobsmacked.
What? Coconut prawns, narco chili, god awful. You know, and so you can see, I could sense, so my mother was about to explode. Susmita ran back to the kitchen. What's going on here? And what?
I took the dish and I was thinking, what is wrong? And they eat Indian food. It's not that they are not used to
But
it.
will you tell them what happened?
Then I saw
Yeah.
two cans of things. One is the mustard and the other one is ishampu. So while chatting with us, telling us all the stories, I also did not notice that she was dipping all her stuff in the ishampu.
So cooking can be a disaster at times.
So whenever there's a disaster in the kitchen in the Basu household, we call it the curse of Kanam.
So that's why you have so that makes okay. But it's just a small interesting trivia. I think this happened in Monterey, right?
It happened in Monterey.
So I think thanks to Ajlai, your mother-in-law finally wrote all her previous anecdotes and published it as Piredaka, right? So that was quite a. So that book is available now.
Yeah, very much so. It's gone into multiple prints, yes.
Incredible. So just for those of you who are not aware, Kunal has had a very, what will I say? He's had a birth which has been blessing to different nature. He was born in a library because his mother was busy writing and finished. Could you let me just fill that in? Sorry.
We don't want to distract too much from this guy.
So that's a very interesting story. He's born in a library, really. Okay, so that's why it's been, writing has been a passion for him all his years, I suppose, in many ways. Can a meal be a very special thing with the experience of having it in a country which is completely different on a circumstance which is like the experience which you had in Cuba, like that?
Sometimes we are foodies, we love food, we both cook, but sometimes you can travel to a place where food is farthest from your mind. Okay? So I remember in the 1990s, we went down to Cuba, and actually I started the first business school in Cuba on behalf of McGill University where I was a prof. It was the time of the American sanctions. So when you read in the papers that the US or the EU or the UK that impose sanctions on a country, one doesn't really know what that means in real life. So when we went down to Cuba in the mid-90s, we understood the meaning of sanctions. So the food in five-star hotels was rancid. Okay. There was no electricity. The private transportation was very scarce. Buses were infrequent. I mean, I used to walk up 10 floors to the University of Havana's Department of Economics because they had lifts, but they did not have electricity to run the lifts. And you could sense that all my Cuban colleagues, you could sense the breath of hunger in the room. You know. So obviously we were excited by cuisine, Cuban music, Ernest Hemingway, and Cuban, the mojito, the famous mojito. But food and recreation was very far from our mind. Okay? So it was a very atypical trip in that sense, except right before we came away, we went to Matanzas. Matanzas is a place in Cuba which is a scene of slave revolts against the Spanish. Also the Spanish-American wars were fought in Matanzas. When Nelson Mandela was released from prison, he went around the world, including Kolkata, and gave speeches. He went to Cuba and spoke in Matanzas. And in Matanzas, we met the African voodoo, the Santeria, which is a religion which is a combination of African rituals and Catholic rituals. And we suddenly discovered very basic Cuban cooking. Okay? Fried sweet potatoes. Okay? A corn salad. I mean, nothing fancy. Okay? And chickpeas. Nothing very fancy, but fresh, authentic, and delightful. Okay? And so we adopted them. We used our imagination, we infused them with our imagination, and we included them in our name, in our feast.
So when you say feast, there's a very clear distinction which you have made, which I don't come out. We have so many memorable outings at people's homes, at restaurants, but the definition of a feast is something which is very specific to you, relate to because of a memory either of a location.
Right, look, sepia prawns, I mean, আমাদের বাঙালি বাড়িতে নারকেল চিংড়ি তো অনেকেই রান্না করে এবং খুব পপুলার, তাই না? And we love it. I mean, it's available in restaurants, in Bengali cuisine restaurants and things like that. The reason sepia prawns has this main course of coconut prawns, and we call it a feast, is because whenever we cook it, we are reminded of my mother, of her stories, of the times she used to describe. You know, when they came from East Bengal, the freedom movement, the partition, okay, the times that are faded like sepia photographs. And therefore that meal is not simply a meal. It's not simply meant for the tongue. It occupies a very special part in memory. Okay? And that's the distinction we draw. We all have great meals. We've had great meals in all kinds of restaurants and clubs and things like that. But do we remember all of them? No. But we remember the special ones that have special meaning for us.
So that's how we've got 12 feasts put across this book magnificently, which is a tapestry of life which you have had through different experiences in the last 40 years of togetherness, right? So this is so incredible. But there's something which you have said is this really stands out, which I read out, which you have said, while there are close to 3,000 or 2,000 recipes and herbs on the planet, the human receptors can only get few, right? It's like the peak and the trough. And there's a lovely analogy you mentioned. Can you just tell us a bit on that?
Yeah, look, we have a tendency, when we in the kitchen we have lots of spices. All of you have lots of spices and herbs. So when you cook something, there's a tendency to dump a lot of them in the pot. Okay. Now there's a risk to that. It's because I'll give you the analogy of perfume. Those the people who craft perfume or make perfume know that when people smell perfume, there is a leading note and a trailing note. And the perfume creators decide a priori what is going to be the leading note of this perfume and the trailing note of the perfume. Just two. Okay? Simplicity. So in whatever we cook, we know that we can overburden a dish with lots of spices and herbs. But you won't taste what we are cooking. If it's vegetarian, you won't know what it is. If it's meat, you won't know. If it is fish, you won't know. You will just taste a concoction of spices. Okay. So what we tend to do is we tend to choose which is going to be the dominant spice that we want you to taste in combination with what we are cooking it for. Okay. And so that's the kind of determination. And it all comes down to one thing, less is more.
That's the mantra which you have said.
It's less is more. Complex recipes. This book is not full of complex recipes. You can pick it up and you can cook in the kitchen. Okay. Largely because complex recipes usually create a barrier between the person who's cooking and some objective grand standard that they're trying to achieve. Okay. Whereas as simple it is, if it is simple, if it is authentic, then it really comes out the way we want it to come out.
And with the hope of getting some unexpected discoveries at the end of the process. You use that word so lovely. It's as if it's an adventure without a deterministic outcome. You want the outcome to happen favorably, and well, you said that. Has anyone in the audience heard of the term Godek? Have you heard the word Godek? Does Godek mean anything?
I mean, it didn't mean anything to us, until we landed up in Jakarta.
Yes. Can you just tell us a bit on that, please, Susmita?
Yes. In Jakarta, when we arrived, some of our palm sugar দিয়ে করে, so it's very sweet. Our lunch or so I said it is a joke.
But they really built up our expectation. They said, President Suharto's
wife
comes down to Jakarta to have Gudeg, and we said, what is it? What is it? Is it fish or fowl? And they said, no. Wait till you taste it, you will know. And it turned out to be echo. Well, We don't want to bash echor. We echor in dalna, Bengalis have grown up
And
with.
it's in season now, I think.
And it's a season.
Yeah.
So,
But so sometimes food can be unexpected. Our quest for the goat meat curry was, eventually we found it in Congo, of all places.
Boko.
Yeah. We had gone down as head of an Oxford University delegation to Congo to meet with the president of the country. And we were flown on a helicopter over the famous Congo rainforest and taken to a small town called Dolisi. Congo had just seen a civil war. Congo has periodic civil wars, if you follow the press. And it was bombed out. The city was bombed out. There were pock marks and bullet holes on the walls, mortar shells. But there was a beautiful garden restaurant. And the delegation was taken to the garden restaurant. When boko was served to us, boko is Congolese mutton. And it was amazing. So what we thought was, we will stay true to our Bengali roots, in other words, our love for goat meat, but rather than make it the way we typically make, we make it a version of boko. Okay? Which is why the main course of that feast, we call that feast Nri Curry.
But even stranger to that was the add-on which you did with the lovely experience with the Suleiman and Ibrahim brothers, right? Was that a recitation to that?
No, what complemented it was green pepper.
Correct, that's right. So, can you give that little story about? I think one of them had two wives, and one of them had something close to that. Okay.
This was a visit to Turkey. So we went to Cappadocia. Some of you have been there, and we lived in a hotel. And the owners were two Turkish brothers, and they were a riot, Ibrahim and Suleiman. And they had very complicated lives, and it turned out that I became their romantic consultant. And so in the evening, after a meal and a copious amount of wine, Ibrahim would tell us, I have a German wife in town and a Turkish wife here.
Both the brothers had two wives.
And they said, when I married my German wife, she said, no problem, you can have as many wives as you like. But once we were married, she said, no, I'm going to be your only wife. Get rid of the rest. Okay? So it was very complicated. The lives were very complicated, and I was trying to advise them. So Ibrahim's Turkish wife was an amazing chef. Okay? And I said, why don't you do a cookbook? Why don't you get her to reveal the recipes and you do a book? It's going to be a hit. He said, you think I haven't suggested that to her? But every time I make the suggestion, she says, do you think I'm a fool? That I'll part with my recipes and some woman will copy them and then you will go to her. But for some reason, she took pity on us. And she led us into some of her favorite recipes. Only the very basic ones. Okay? And so from her, we learned to make a salad with tomatoes and onions and pomegranate, okay, which was delightful. It was so fresh and delightful. Okay, so all these dishes have stories attached to them. We simply didn't invent them.
I think that was Josie Amando incident. That was another one with Donna Flor. Two husbands. So let's have about that.
Jorge Amado is a Latin. We were at one point. We loved Latin culture, literature. So I read this book called Donna Flor and Her Two Husbands. And there was in the beginning of the book there was a recipe of a crab recipe. So I thought and that was very interesting. And
but have you read Donna Flor and Two Husbands? There's a film where Sonia Braga acts as Donna Flor. It's an amazing story of a lady in Brazil, in Bahia, called Donna Flor. And she's married to an absolute scoundrel, okay, who is a serial adulterer, he's a gambler, he's a drunk, but he's an amazing lover. Okay? But her husband, Vadino, one day suddenly dies of a heart attack while he's dancing the samba. Okay? So Donna Flor is heartbroken. And then she marries, after the period of mourning is over, she marries a pharmacist who's our ardent admirer. And this pharmacist is the exact opposite of her dead husband. He's steady, he's reliable, he's very polite, and he's very boring. Okay? So Donna Flor runs a cooking school at home. Okay? And Vadino's, her dead husband's favorite dish was crab. So she would make this crab, and suddenly she noticed one day that Vadino, the dead husband, has come as a ghost. Okay? None of the ladies can see her except him, except she. Okay? And she sees that her dead husband has come to taste the crab and is completely naked. Okay? And so Donna is totally flustered. What is he doing here? What is he doing? But nobody else can see him. And so he dips his finger in the pot and he tastes and he gives her advice saying, oh, this is this, you should add more of that. And in the novel, Jorge Amado has this full recipe of that crab. And so Donna Susmita adapted it to her taste, and so that becomes a meal in our feast.
So you have, okay, now we're going to change a bit of locale, right? There is Bali and Bengal are far apart, right? But would you like to tell us something more about Bali and Bengal and how it spins back and gets back into the storylines you all have had?
We have all grown up with Abanindranath Tagore, grown up with Rupkatha. But despite our Bengali's love for Rupkatha, our world doesn't resemble the world of fairy tales. Rupkathaর জগতে তো আমরা জন্মাইনি, কিন্তু আমরা রূপকথা পড়েছি। আমরা যখন প্রথম বালি যাই, many years ago, okay, suddenly it felt that this is the world of the Bengali fairy tale. Okay, the flora and fauna, the temple bells, the dress of the people, it was so charming and magical. Particularly if one leaves the beaches and goes up to Ubud, which is the heart of Bali in many respects. And therefore we felt that Bali and Bengal, although separated by many miles, are like twin brothers, children who have been separated at birth. Okay. And in Bali, of course, not surprisingly, fish fry is very popular, as it is in Bengal. I mean, fish fry is ubiquitous in Bengal. Okay. Except that their fish fry is shallow fried, it's not very hard fried. Ours tends to be more crusty. So we came up with, in this feast of friendship, we call it fish of friendship, between Bali and Bengal, we come up with our own fish fry, which is sort of in between the two, but also relies on আমাদের fish fry লোকে এখানে tomato ketchup আর mustard দিয়ে খায়. Okay, but it's an opportunity missed because you can have all kinds of sauces one can make and then dip them in them. So we borrowed on the Balinese practice of making sauces, and they make amazing sauces. So they make a sauce called rojak sauce. We make a rojak sauce, and we use that with this fish.
Rojak sauce is actually used in fruits, basically, but we thought that it would be nicer. We tried it
with the fish.
With the fish.
So that was part of the main dish itself.
Yeah.
Yes.
And does this take you back to your Shantiniketan days?
For the use of tannin? Yes.
I can imagine.
Rabindranath had been to both Bali and Yogyakarta, and obviously, and one thing he had said in Yogyakarta, which actually rings true to us, he said, travel doesn't start once you reach a destination. Travel starts before you reach the destination. Because you read, you prepare the mind. And when you prepare the mind and you reach the destination, then you see things that normally you would not see. So we have this photograph of Rabindranath in his Althalla standing on the steps of Borobudur in our book. And he was very upset. He said, there are all these hundreds of tourists milling all around. He said, we're talking the 1920s. Okay? And now the number of tourists have gone up. There's so many tourists all around, and they don't know what this place is. They're chit-chatting, and now they will be taking selfies, of course. Okay? And so we have followed on the steps of Rabindranath in the sense that we always prepare our mind before we reach the destination, so the travel can start happening beforehand.
And also Rabindranath was inspired, all kind of dresses, attire, was very much inspired by Balinese dance
let us cross back and go to Montreal, back in time, across continents. So Montreal has had a severe impact because one, you all were much younger, and that was a new kind of environment, specifically when you moved in to Canada from the US. So how did Montreal work about in those, the cosmopolitan culture and the rest?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, and I think you will agree, Montreal made us truly cosmopolitans. Because remember, it is a French town. It is in Quebec, the French part of Canada. But it's not simply a part of Europe in North America. It's also a part of the Caribbeans in North America. Because a lot of people from the Caribbeans who emigrated to Montreal and to Quebec. It's a part of Asia in North America. A lot of Vietnamese, Lao and Cambodians make their home there. It's a part of Africa in North America. Because Moroccans, Algerians are in large numbers. Plus, unlike the US, which is a melting pot, Canada is a mosaic. In other words, there is no effort to eradicate the vestiges of the cultures that the immigrants have come with. And therefore, we suddenly found ourselves in a world, in Montreal, which was gastronomically diverse, it was music-wise diverse, it was diverse in terms of literature, and it truly made us cosmopolitan. I'll give you an example. There's a lot of French stuff already, of course, there. Our French was very rusty. Susmita was learning Chinese. She has a degree in Chinese from McGill. And all her new language acquisition was Chinese. I was too busy doing my academic work and writing my novels. Our daughter was in school and she was very well conversant in French. We were very nervous about going to a French restaurant and ordering a French meal. We thought we'd order the wrong thing.
Most boring food ever.
Well, we thought the waiters would snigger at us.
And listen to all the conversation. Okay.
Maybe we would mispronounce the names. So we were very nervous. We did everything else, but we didn't do French in the early years. And then we said, what the heck? And we marched in one day and we ordered our French dishes, coco vin, which features in the book.
That's what you got to say in Maya.
Which features in the book. And which set us down into French cuisine, which is a completely different discovery. But rather than do an authentic French cuisine, which we shied away from, in fact, we don't do anything authentic in this book. So we went to Peru, and the Peruvian Ceviche is not the authentic ceviche. The gudeg that you have in this book is not the authentic Yogyakarta gudeg. They are authentic to our taste.
So this is not a recipe for any particular region. So that's
right. So we adapted it to our taste, and that's what you see as recipes in the book.
So did you attend the Montreal Jazz Fest at any point?
We did.
We did, yeah. Oh, incredible. So Montreal, I think is a very interesting comment you made. It had the spikes, it had the highest number of churches and highest number of bars. Yeah. So which one did you attend?
But the bars featured prominently, I can tell you that.
Yeah, sure you did. And Hugh Macasela, the trumpeter, I think I also saw an album cover. That was incredible. They were the best musicians, jazz musicians you could have in Montreal, I'd say. So that was really wonderful. I will now come back travel right across the globe to Bruce Lee chili pork. Sheda Susmita, you'll have to give us that story. How it all happened. How did Bruce Lee? Of course, there has to be a China connection to everything. That's because of. Wait, let me do this correctly. Wang Chan Hao Susmita.
Wan Chan Hao.
Nai John Tan De Fun Shan Han Chi Lan Han Pao Yang.
Kelvin.
Your dress is looking wonderful.
Thank you.
Sorry, my pronunciation.
Oh, I got it. That's why I said Kelvin is very beautiful. And Xie.
Thank you. Okay.
So it came about in this curious way, but that you talk about this. When we went on honeymoon, we had no money. We were dirt poor. Okay. So we went to Kalimpong during winter, largely because the room rents were low.
And I remember interrupting, you carried a egg roll in a newspaper, right? And the mustard cup or something.
So the only luxury we allowed ourselves was we stayed in Morgan House. Okay.
Yes.
It's an amazing view of the mountains and so forth. But we couldn't order a full dinner. That'd be too much. Okay, so we order one dinner, then we split it. But the waiters understood and they were very kind. So they gave us more, the quantity, increased the quantity of the dinner, so we were fine. So but one day, we went down to this to town and we went into a small little eatery. We were very hungry. And we said, let's splurge. And we ordered chili pork. Okay, and it took a long time to come and it built up our hunger. And right above our heads was this giant poster of Bruce Lee, striking at this menacing pose. Okay? And when that pork arrived, it was blessed. It was amazing. It perhaps had to do with our hunger, the fact that we were so hungry that anything would have tasted great. Okay? But this was really extra special. And so whenever we cook chili pork, it reminds us of Kalimpong, it reminds us of Bruce Lee. So we call it Bruce Lee chili pork. But the biggest disappointment was when we first went to China, the pork tasted completely insipid, particularly in Beijing. Northern Chinese cuisine does not have spices, it's very bland. And I kept pushing Sushmita and said, ask them to bring churro. But the churro, which is pork, that arrived at the table was nothing like Bruce Lee chili pork.
I'm always sure that you'll have a chapter on a Chinese cuisine because you'll have made 12 visits to China.
Yeah, it's about that.
Yeah, and you were also there at the time when I got some lovely pictures here too, in 1989, 4th or 5th of June.
The Tiananmen event. Yes, we were there. I was in Tiananmen when it was happening.
And you did shoot all these pictures that were shot by you?
Yeah.
Incredible. Okay, now we can't let this go. Since you all are located in Oxford, and you'll have this incredible experience of going out for picnics, right? So is this picnic business, eating in the outdoor, so is it a British concept or is it?
No, actually we Indians, when we think about picnic, we think it's a British practice, right? But actually picnic is a French word. And it was much more popular in France, much before it became popular in England. And the story goes that after the French Revolution, the French aristocracy fled and some of them came to England. Okay? And they brought with them this practice of having communal meals in a garden setting. That's what it means. A communal meal in a garden setting. Not a dinner, usually a late morning breakfast, a brunch, or a lunch. And it became incredibly popular in Victorian England. You just have to read English literature, novels, to see from Jane Austen to D.H. Lawrence to George Orwell. So it's full of picnics. Important things happen in picnics. People fall in love in picnics. People fight at picnics. Okay, people strike. All kinds of business deals in picnics. So on and so forth.
But Monet paintings gives what you are saying is correctly. It's a lot of outdoor painting.
A lot of outdoor eating. And so, the whole basis of a picnic is that pick a picturesque setting and then go and take whatever you want to eat. There's no fixed menu of a picnic. Okay? There's some common things that the British have, it's like shepherd's pie and Scotch eggs and stuff like that, but you can pretty much take anything. But the trick is to find a picturesque location, preferably near water. And we tell our friends that when the sun is shining, there are few places on earth more picturesque than Oxford. The tragedy is the sun doesn't shine too much.
So Kunal, is this book a thread of life?
It has to be, isn't it? Sometimes when the first copy arrived, it actually really surprised us because we turned the pages and we said, is this the kind of life that we've led? I mean, there's a ghost story here, okay, which inspired a feast.
Was that Morgan's?
No.
This is the other one,
in Rajasthan.
Okay.
In Rajasthan, we saw a ghost, and the ghost gave us a recipe. Would you believe it? I'm not making it up, or at least I'm half making it up. As an author, I'm allowed to do that. Should I tell you the story?
Please.
So we went to Mandawa. Okay, and I'm sure some of you have been there. Old crumbling Havelis. with beautifully painted walls, abandoned. Some of them have been turned into hotels. Okay? And we stayed in one of those Haveli hotels, dead tired after traveling for hours and days to Gujarat and Rajasthan. Okay? We realized while we were having dinner in the courtyard, very good dinner, that we were the only residents. The three of us, our daughter, Sushmita and me, were the only residents, which is fine. Moonlit night. The meal was good, but the main course of the chicken curry was out of this world. So when the chef came, we said, what did you cook it with, and so forth, and he told us in his own way the recipe, and we made mental notes. Okay, so this is what it goes into. As he was going away, I said, hang on, wait a second, whose recipe is this? And his face fell. He didn't answer. I said, well, tell us, is it your recipe? He said, no. Whose recipe is this? And he said, it's a dead queen of this Haveli. I said, okay, it was her recipe. What was her name? And he said, no, I can't tell her your name. I said, well, why not? Does she not have a name? And he said, no, if I mention her name, then she will appear. I said, what? You mean appear as what? As a ghost? And he won't answer, he went to it. And we had a laugh about this. And we said, oh, what a great marketing ploy this is, build and yarn and people will be excited and all of that. We went to our quarters, Sushmita and I in our room and our daughter in the next room. But we couldn't fall asleep. Strange things seemed to be happening. There were all these framed portraits up on the walls, so light inside the room, but a lamp seemed to be flickering in sequence from one frame to another, almost like a 3D kind of an experience. Felt a bit strange. Sushmita went to the toilet, middle of the night, and she suddenly screamed, Kunal! So I jumped up from bed and I ran to the washroom. What's going on?
And actually, nothing happened. The window was open. It suddenly
closed. It could have been a draft of wind, breeze.
But there was no draft.
Yeah, so it was a bit strange. So she comes back, I couldn't sleep. I opened the window and I saw, moonlit night, a black bull walking through this narrow lane and coming close to the hotel. The bulls don't roam around at night. So I go to the toilet next. Everything was fine. It was coming out, warm breath on my left cheek. A kiss. I said, oh, that's interesting. So I stood for a moment, and then came back. Our daughter knocks on the door and says, I can't fall asleep. Can I come and sleep on the sofa in your room? I said, yeah, sure, sleep on the sofa. A strange night, early morning we fell asleep, all three of us. We were woken by one of the attendants, and who scolded us, said, you shouldn't have slept with the doors left open. The bats could have flown in and disturbed you, civet cats could have come in and disturbed you. I said, but we didn't. We didn't keep the doors open. Would any of you go to a hotel room and sleep keeping the doors open at night? You wouldn't, right? The doors were shut. But we found when we woke up, the door was open, and right bang diagonally across was the janana, the ladies' quarters, flooded with light. And so we thought, maybe it was as simple as the queen who was happy that we had liked her chicken and she had come at night to just say thank you. But she scared us out of our wits. So we kept the recipe, we cooked the chicken. I think it's a lovely recipe, but we never mentioned the name of the queen when we cook. It's just chicken unspeakable.
That's a lovely little anecdote. But I've noticed in most of these feasts, you have this lovely way of creating the ambience with the method of serving the dishes, and is that a part of this whole process?
Yeah, very much so. You see, a feast also has to be a visual feast. So you cook something special, and you just can't lay it out in any kind of plates on the table. So we spend hours saying, well, should we serve it on ceramic? Should we serve it on stoneware? Should we serve it on stone? Should we serve it on wicker? Should we serve it on kolapata, on bronze, on wooden utensils? And you will see that in each of the feasts which we have in the book, given the
different types of
the different kinds of arrangements, which evoke the kind of meal that you're having.
So So I'm going to ask a difficult question now. Now what? Have you asked yourselves once this book has been finished? I know this is completely something which is not a definite end. This is not something which you work towards as a compendium. It's not something which is going to be singular. So it's something which organically it might just grow into something beyond this. Is it possible?
The answer is we don't know. You know, we didn't tell ourselves when we started traveling 40 years back that we will keep a record of all these places, so one day we will put it together in a book. We never said that. It happened because we lived a life. And if we live, hopefully if we live for a few more years, and if you're able to travel, if you're able to engage with life, discover new things, then there might be more movable feasts in the future. But one thing is assured, we are not going to do a repetition of this. Because the biggest fun of for us doing this book was discovery. You know, discover something exciting about the world, discover something exciting about us that we didn't know. And if our journey of discovery continues, then maybe someday there will be another volume which is sort of like this, whether it will have food and art and history and all of that in equal measure, we don't know.
But you mentioned this so beautifully as no man ever enters the river twice.
So there's this famous statement of the Greek philosopher Heraclitus who said, "No man steps into the same river twice, for it is not the same river and he's not the same man." And of course, you will add, it's not the same woman and not the same river.
That's true. But as just Rabindranath Tagore has observed on the steps of Borobudur, which you mentioned, preparing the mind comes first, before the actual gestation or immersion in an artistic experience.
You know, sometimes it also leads to disappointment, as I'm sure it's happened with all of you. We were all set to travel to Iran, okay, Isfahan and all of these places. I've actually been to Tehran briefly once, but to travel to Iran and really explore Persian culture, which has so much influenced us in many different ways, and so forth. But before we could do that, the trouble started in Iran, and now it's practically very difficult for us to travel there. But we started preparing for it. We started reading up. We started, we started going to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London to look at folios of Persian miniature art. Because you see, the Turks brought miniature painting to Iran, to Persia. The Persians brought it to Central Asia and in turn to India, and it became the most innovative and the most creative school of miniatures which we now today call Indian miniatures. So we spend a lot of time reading up about these things, going to museums and preparing our minds, but sometimes the journey doesn't happen.
Oh, well said. So there's some part where you mentioned this sounded so beautiful. You said there is no perfect sunset, right? Each sunset is as special as it gets. So each recipe of yours is a perfection by itself. It's not just the outcome which you're getting at the moment. So when you're revisiting it and doing it your way, apart from the process, you're not wanting an outcome which is going to be similar.
No, look, I'll come back to Keema Ruvistani. Okay, so there is a recipe of that. But when we next cook Keema Ruvistani, the framework of that cooking is going to perhaps be the same, but I cannot guarantee that we're going to follow that recipe to the T. I may not use rose petals, dried rose petals, which we do in this book. We may substitute it with something else completely. In other words, to see cooking as a stage for creativity. We make this distinction in this book, the difference between an artisan and an artist. Take Baluchuri Sharis. In the 80s, I'd done a documentary film on Baluchuri Sharis. Okay? And researched Baluchuri Sharis quite a bit. The classic weavers of Baluchuri reproduce a time-honored design. And if you're a very good weaver, then you're able to recreate the exact number of booties And the X, which is paisley.
One's own picture, drawing lavishly from it, but following nobody's rules but one's own. The result is bound to be idiosyncratic, leading sometimes to a disaster, sometimes otherwise. Neither is such artistry limited to cooking. That's good. And in the crowded field of opinions and advices, you have cared much about what...
We don't like reading cookbooks. The problem is when I read a cookbook, I feel very hungry. When you watch it,
even in Facebook, there are always recipes.
Where she put in some humor, like neatly this man is really minded after that.
One good thing one good thing which has happened is we are all sharing our recipes on Facebook and other ways, etc. Right? But first of all, I can't remember the details of the recipe, and I feel very hungry. Midways, I stop and say, "Susmita, let's go eat." So we did not want to
I
write.
have a request. I haven't seen the book, but if you have written about the Wallan steamer chicken curry, Wallan steamer chicken curry, Dhaka, Wallan like that, chicken curry, you don't have that.
Look, before we do that, we need to have a memorable visit to Bangladesh and to steamer in Wallan. There's so many wonderful things to eat in this life. Yeah.
So we'll take cue from this. I'm just going to summarize one small bit before we open the questions to audience. If you have some questions with the mic, we'll give you. So this is what a small stanza I'm reading out from the book itself. Most of all, we plan to zealously guard that sense of wonder that has kept us going so far, save it from jadedness and premature wisdom. There is more to see, know, feel and taste, much more. And luckily, there's still that precious fuel remaining in the tank that Picasso had so succinctly described as love. How brilliantly said, love is the greatest refreshment of life.
Yeah, if the passion goes, then there's no point writing a book or any book. And we didn't know that our passion would take us in this direction. I write novels and short stories and write for cinema. Susmita does ceramic. She spends the whole day in her studio in Oxford. I'm all day at my desk. And then we meet for snacks, and Susmita takes out usually a banana and says, "This is your snack." So that's our life. We didn't know that our passion would take us in this direction, but it has. And as long as there is passion in this direction, we'll keep adding to this. Okay? And hopefully the passion will never die.
How lovely. With these few wonderful words, I would request the audience, if you have any questions, if there is any microphone that can be sent across to the audience, like a microphone. If you have any questions, you can just ask it from there itself. Yes, please cover.
I just wanted to know.
Yeah. Use the mic, sir.
I'm a teacher. My voice is audible.
Your voice is wonderful.
No, audible, I said.
It's very audible and wonderful, yeah.
Actually, I wanted to ask, Shan said it's 40 years life and such an interesting life, absolutely. So many things, art, literature, history, all sort of enmeshed in the cooking that you're doing. How did you select the few that you have shared in this book?
Very, very good question. We didn't have a magic number in our head. We'll do 6 or we'll do 10 or we'll do 12. Okay? And when we started, the first few we did without a book in mind. So sepia prawns, Nri Curry, keema Rungistani, we did on a trot. And then once we got used to the rhythm of it and we got seduced by doing these, we sat down and said, what do we remember as the most memorable? Okay? And then we started circling around them, and then we generated the other ones. Now, could we have done more? Yes. There's one thing that we don't have. We don't have a feast where the main course is vegetarian.
I was just going to my next question.
There are many vegetarian dishes. There are many.
But there are side dishes there.
There are side dishes. There are many vegetarian side dishes, but we don't have a vegetarian main course.
And organic vegetable.
But we do have that here.
Only one, that is gudeg.
Gudeg is
The ichur.
That's why I asked. I don't specifically.
But we thought we could do a main course which is a take on our khichuri, but a completely different kind of khichuri inspired by our travels in Ethiopia. Okay? But at the end of the day, we also wanted to be kind to our publisher. Gosh, if we just keep on doing this, the book is already 500 pages, you know. But yes, there was some thought that went into how many and which ones.
Thank you.
We'll take a last quick question before you go. Both of you want to ask something? Sure, please.
So there is a saying that our civilization we are all time. So with that, I find that there is a change in food habit. Like I like to eat fish, mishmash and all. But my son, he takes only chicken and this thing broth. So why this has happened?
No, I mean, all kinds of reasons. I mean, even people within the same generation, the same house. I'll give you an example. There is real disagreement in the Basu household when it comes to Japanese cuisine. We have a whole chapter called Hokusai Dreams, which is on Japan. Susmita loves sushi and sashimi. I hate it. Okay? When we travel to Japan, we go to Japan quite frequently, she has a fill of sushi and sashimi. I don't eat. So we said, we both love Japan for various different reasons. What is the lowest common denominator that we can agree upon? It's tempura. Everybody likes tempura. So what we said was, let's take our popular dorma and make a tempura out of it. And we call it dorma tempura. So we have a dorma tempura.